We live in an age of constant noise. Notifications buzz, voices compete for attention, opinions flood every platform, and silence has become almost unnatural. Yet, amid this endless noise, people feel increasingly restless, anxious, and disconnected. Why? Because the human soul was never designed for perpetual chaos. It was designed for balance, for times of engagement, but also for times of retreat. And when the longing for peace becomes strong enough, people naturally turn towards solitude, not out of rejection of others, but out of a deep need for healing. Solitude is often misunderstood. Many confuse it with loneliness, imagining solitude as a kind of emptiness, a void. But solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the absence of connection. Solitude is the presence of yourself. It is the intentional act of stepping away from external noise so you can hear your own thoughts again. It is a medicine the modern world has forgotten. And when you truly embrace solitude, you begin to see how it functions as a kind of inner healing. Think about the way wounds heal. If you scrape your skin, you don't press on it repeatedly. You don't expose it to constant irritation. You give it rest. You cover it. You let it breathe. The body repairs itself in stillness. The same principle applies to the mind and the heart. If you've been hurt by constant stress, conflict, or overexposure to the demands of others, you cannot expect to heal by rushing into more of the same. Healing comes through solitude, through quiet moments where you're not being pulled in 100 directions, where you can simply build. Psychological solitude restores clarity. When you're constantly surrounded by others, their voices blend with your own until you no longer know what you truly think or feel. The opinions, judgments, and demands of others drown out your inner voice. But when you step into solitude, the noise begins to fade, and slowly you start to hear yourself again. You realize what actually matters to you, what values you hold, and what desires are authentic rather than borrowed. This self-awareness is deeply healing, because so much suffering comes from living out of alignment with who you truly are. Philosophically, solitude is a confrontation with truth. Without distractions, you cannot run from yourself. That's why many people fear solitude. It forces them to face the reality of their own minds. But it is only by facing those truths, even the uncomfortable ones, that real peace can emerge. The person who learns to sit quietly with themselves, who learns to process their own fears, regrets, or doubts, becomes far stronger than the person who constantly hides in crowds. Solitude teaches acceptance of self, and acceptance is a prerequisite for peace. We laisse trade. Solitude is also spiritual. Across cultures and traditions, from monks in monasteries to sages in deserts, solitude has been seen as the doorway to higher wisdom. Why? Because when you are no longer consumed by the chatter of daily life, you open space for deeper reflection. You begin to sense connections that were invisible before. You feel the presence of something larger than yourself. Peace in solitude is not just psychological. It's existential. It reminds you that life is more than tasks and noise. It is a mystery, and in quietness you touch its depth. But solitude as healing doesn't mean permanent withdrawal. It's not about rejecting people or relationships. It's about balance. Just as the body needs both activity and rest, the soul needs both community and solitude. One without the other becomes unhealthy. Too much isolation becomes despair. Too much noise becomes chaos. Healing solitude is about the rhythm of stepping back when needed, so that when you step forward again, you do so with clarity, strength, and peace. Practically, solitude can take many forms. It might mean taking a walk without headphones, allowing yourself to notice your own breathing. It might mean setting aside time to journal, to think on paper, so your thoughts stop swirling chaotically in your head. It might mean sitting quietly with a cup of tea, watching the sunrise, without feeling the need to document it online. These small acts of solitude are not wasted time. They are the very moments where your inner world is restored. And here's the paradox: solitude makes you better at relationships. When you've healed in solitude, you no longer enter relationships out of desperation. You don't cling to others as a way to escape yourself. Instead, you connect from a place of wholeness, bringing peace rather than demanding it. Solitude heals you so that you can love others more freely, without burdening them with the responsibility of fixing your unrest. The desire for peace is what drives people to solitude, but the healing that solitude provides is what allows them to re-engage with the world in healthier ways. Solitude becomes not a retreat from life, but a renewal for life. It is like going to a well, drawing water, so that you can return to the journey refreshed. So when you feel the pull towards solitude, don't mistake it as weakness. Recognize it for what it is, the soul's way of saying, I need to breathe. Listen to that voice. Step away, heal, and in that healing, you'll discover that solitude is not the absence of life. It is the space where life regains its balance. Solitude is often misinterpreted as weakness. People imagine the one who sits alone as someone abandoned, unloved, or socially incapable. But this is a shallow interpretation. True solitude, chosen solitude, is not weakness at all. It is strength. It takes courage to step away from the crowd, to resist the constant pull of validation, and to confront yourself without. Weakness hides in noise. Strength is revealed in silence. When you are constantly surrounded by people, it is easy to lose yourself in them. Their moods, their expectations, their judgments, all these things blur your own identity. But when you step into solitude, you are stripped of all those external mirrors. You face the raw reality of who you are when there is no audience. That is not weakness. It is the hardest, most courageous work a person can do. Only those who are strong enough to endure their own company can truly grow in solitude. Psychologically, solitude develops resilience. Think about it. The person who constantly depends on others for distraction, entertainment, or validation is fragile. The moment they are left alone, they collapse into anxiety or despair. But the person who has learned to be at peace in solitude is unshakable. They're not enslaved to constant. They carry within them a quiet strength, a self-sufficiency that makes them adaptable to any environment. Such people can walk into the world with calmness because they know they can retreat into themselves when needed. Philosophically, solitude teaches independence. Dependency is easy. It requires no inner work, only constant attachment. But independence, true independence, is forged in solitude. It is the recognition that while relationships enrich life, they do not define your existence. You carry meaning within yourself. You are not waiting to be completed by others. You already contain wholeness. This kind of independence is not arrogance. It is strength tempered by humility, because it acknowledges both the value of others and the necessity of self-reliance. And solitude is not only about independence from others, it is about mastery of the self. When you are alone, distractions fall away and you see your own patterns more clearly. You notice your habits, your impulses, your fears. To sit with those realities and not run from them builds strength. The person who refuses solitude avoids themselves, but the person who embraces solitude confronts their inner world. And in that confrontation, they develop discipline. They learn patience, focus, and emotional regulation, all of which are the markers of true strength. Consider this: armies are trained with drills, athletes with repetition, musicians with practice. All of these are forms of solitude, hours of quiet discipline without applause. The crowd sees only the final performance, but the strength was built in silence. Solitude is the training ground for greatness. Without it, there can be no mastery, no resilience, no depth. Many fear solitude because it feels empty, but emptiness is not always weakness. It is also potential. A blank page is empty, but it holds infinite possibility. An open field is empty, but it can grow 1,000 harvests. Solitude is the same. It may feel empty, but it is the very space in which you can build strength, clarity, and direction. Weakness is not found in solitude. It is found in the inability to endure it. Think about history's great thinkers, leaders, and creators. Nearly all of them had seasons of solitude. They withdrew not because they were weak, but because they needed the silence to see clearly. Solitude gave them the strength to return to the world with ideas, with vision, with courage. The person who has never practiced solitude often lacks depth. They may be skilled in performing for others, but when life demands resilience, they falter. Strength built in solitude is what allows people to endure suffering, to make wise decisions, and to stand firm when everyone else collapses. Now, solitude does not mean isolation from love or community. Strength is not about shutting the world out forever. It is about being capable of standing alone when needed. It is about not being ruled by the fear of aloneness. The paradox is this: the more comfortable you are with solitude, the better you become at relationships. Why? Because you are no longer clinging to people to fill a void. You enter relationships out of choice, not desperation. That freedom creates healthier, stronger bonds. To see solitude as weakness is to misunderstand strength. Weakness clings. Weakness panics when left alone. Weakness cannot face the mirror of silence. But strength sits quietly, breathes deeply, and builds a fortress within time. Solitude is not a sign that no one wants you. It is a sign that you no longer need to be wanted to feel whole. That is a radical strength. And once it is cultivated, it cannot be easily shaken. So when life pushes you towards solitude, don't run from it. Don't see it as punishment. See it as training. Use it to sharpen your mind, to stabilize your emotions, to deepen your character. The desire for peace naturally makes us fall in love with solitude, and it is in solitude that peace transforms into strength. When people hear the word solitude, they often assume it means rejection of others. They imagine the solitary person as antisocial, detached, or incapable of love. But the reality is the opposite. Solitude is not a rejection of relationships. It is a purification of them. It is the filter that reveals which connections are real and which are merely distractions. You see, when you are always surrounded by noise, by people, by activity, it becomes difficult to separate the genuine from the superficial. Everyone seems important. Everyone seems necessary because you are swept up in the current of social obligation and social pressure. But when you step back into solitude, the picture becomes clearer. People fade. Because they were never truly connected to you, they were only attached to what you could give them or to the role you played in their lives. Others remain present in your heart and mind, even in silence, because their bond with you is real. Solitude reveals the difference. Think of it this way: if you stop reaching out, who still reaches in? If you fall silent, who still hears you without words? If you walk away from the constant performance of proving yourself, who still loves you simply for who you are? These questions only emerge in solitude because solitude strips away performance. It forces you to stop playing roles and confront which relationships survive without constant maintenance. This is a hard truth for many to accept because solitude can feel like loss. You realize that many of the people you considered close were only companions of convenience. They were there for the good times, for the entertainment, for the benefit, but not for you. At first, that realization feels like betrayal, but in reality, it is liberation. Because it is better to see the truth than to live surrounded by illusions. Solitude gives you the clarity to stop investing in relationships that drain you and to cherish the ones that truly matter. Philosophically, this is profound. It teaches us that love is not constant activity, it is presence. The people who love you do not disappear when you retreat into solitude. They remain anchored, patient, and real. Their love does not depend on your performance, your productivity, or your constant availability. It exists quietly, like a flame that burns whether the room is crowded or empty. And you would never know the strength of that flame unless solitude revealed it. Psychologically, solitude also improves the way you relate to others. When you learn to be at peace with yourself, you stop clinging to people out of desperation. You stop forcing connections because you fear being alone. Instead, you begin to choose relationships from a place of strength. You no longer ask, who will fill my emptiness, but rather, who adds to the fullness I already carry within? This shift transforms your relationships. They become healthier, more authentic, less toxic. Solitude also teaches gratitude. When you step away and then return, you notice who truly matters. You stop taking people for granted because you realize how rare genuine connection is. You learn to value quality over quantity. Instead of hundreds of shallow interactions, you begin to treasure the few bonds that withstand silence, distance, and time. Solitude is the test, and only the real ones pass it. This is why so many people fear solitude. They fear what it will reveal. They fear discovering that the relationships they've built are hollow. They fear seeing how few people truly know them. But running from that fear only prolongs the inevitable. The truth is always there waiting. And when you finally face it, painful as it may be, you come out stronger. You walk into the world with clarity, able to love more deeply, because you know who deserves your love. History also shows us this principle. Great leaders, thinkers, and spiritual figures often withdrew into solitude before returning with renewed strength. In that time alone, they were not only confronting themselves, they were also clarifying their relationships. They saw who remained loyal in silence, who stood by them when nothing was being given in return. That knowledge empowered them to walk boldly into their calling, surrounded not by many, but by the few who were true. And here's the paradox. Solitude does not diminish relationships, it strengthens them. By teaching you to be whole on your own, it allows you to enter relationships without fear, without manipulation. You become someone capable of loving without clinging, of giving without expecting, of walking away when love is absent, and of staying when it is real. That is the kind of love the world desperately needs, love born not out of loneliness, but out of wholeness. So solitude, far from being an enemy of connection, is its greatest teacher. It reveals the truth of who is with you and who is not. It cleanses your life of shallow attachments and highlights the rare, precious bonds that endure without constant performance. And in doing so, it allows you to love more freely, more deeply, and more honestly.